Hi, folks. This is Herb Stevenson. This is a continuation of the podcast, Natural Passages, Revealing the Unmarked Doors of Life. Or sometimes I like to say is finding a new way of being who you are and doing yourself. Um, we've talked about quite a few things, wobble and doubt and various other things. One of the subjects I've been studying quite a bit, especially in organizations that I consult for. It's called not doing. And not doing is counterculture because we actually have created a tyranny of doing, which basically means do anything. And when you glorify busyness, or at least the appearance of looking busy, we end up not really being highly functional. So what we end up doing is we praise people for action, speed, and decisive doing, all good traits during the right circumstances. But if you do that all the time, you lose strategic clarity, creative insight, and genuine connection to each other as well as to whatever the business purpose is. So, not doing as a spiritual practice, or if you would prefer the tyranny of doing, is a way to begin to look at as either as a leader or as a coach, actually any aspect of yourself. It's slowing the compulsion to act, holding space for awareness, and allowing emergence to occur. So oftentimes we just don't know how to do that. John Cotter talked about this years ago about false urgency. We got so busy of just, and Tom Peters years ago said, ready, fire, aim. And during that time, we were trying to figure out, we didn't really have phrases like VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous moments like we have now. And the impact of it is we've gotten into this process where we just simply don't slow down. And so when you look at not doing, another way of saying it is instead of managing the details and not seeing the larger picture, we begin to look at how do I manage the strategic space. So instead of frantic decision making and barking orders or doing various other things, either as a coach, human being, we began to do what's called strategic holding. Examples of that are one organization actually realized that a quiet time of dialogue, very little planned um, agenda, was to look at a possible acquisition that they were considering. And through the dialogue and then and long quiet spells, literally set up for reflection hours, and in a very nice nature setting, they began to realize that they were chasing acquisition or chasing value. Uh, and the issue wasn't that they were more fear of falling behind than the actual value of this acquisition. And the impact of it is they redirected their resources into strengthening customer loyalty, improving operational efficiency, not from the point of view of cost cutting, but literally operational efficiency, not done as often as it should be. And it proved to be much, much more profitable. I know. So this is just one of those things of not doing is another way of saying is rethinking how we approach our things and don't always go into action. So when we do not doing as a form of presence, it means listening without rushing to respond. We don't react. We hold silence in meetings to let deeper truths. In other words, we don't, I often refer to it, it feels like an Olympic ping pong championship. The ideas and words are bouncing around so fast and competing with each other, no one hears anything. And it's often very, very frustrating. In fact, one organization years ago that I was working with, I told them they reminded me of a pinball machine. The only trouble is everybody was the ball, so they were all out there bouncing around, loving the idea of the lights flashing and the bells ringing and everything else, and nobody was paying attention to not only the score, but what was the purpose of the game. And every time they got into one of their frenzies, I suggested that somebody, all of them, have a responsibility. somebody say ping pong, and the agreement by the group is to stop the ping pong, stop the competitive ideas, and actually dialogue where we were listening and deepening the meaning making to really understand. So instead of being in a rush, we actually decided that it was more important to be fully present. So it's one of those things that you have to ask yourself, how might we shift to a more presence-based process of managing our life? We'll just leave it at that, and you can apply it wherever you wish. And I often use the principles, you've heard me say this in prior podcasts, slow is fast, less is more, and small is big. I like to use the example of is this company over the years had built a little small town because they built this factory at let's just say this business in a garage, and it grew and grew and suddenly created all these jobs and these well-being for everybody. And they also happened to own the mountain above the valley they were building. And one day, at a retreat up on the top of the mountain, in a moment of excitement and thrill of a new idea, CEO made a snowball and threw it down the hill. Snow was wet, the hill was steep, and the snowball kept growing and growing and growing to the point that it got down to actually the thing that they were wanting to create, and it wiped the village out. Slow is fast, less is more, small is big means we develop and we actually look at innovation not from a relentless doing, but from suspending the habitual, meaning not doing means resisting premature closure or premature action. Example of that, most people are aware of, Google has this, I think it's called 20% time, where it frees up employees for 20% of their time from direct assignments. And it's designed to nurture them. And from what I understand, that birthed Gmail and also Google Maps, because in that 20%, they were able to be creative and think about the things they want. I often talk about white space. When I work with my clients, I ask how many of them set aside time every day that you cannot violate the calendar. That's personal time. And that personal time should be, as if nothing else, to reflect. We think if you reflect, you're not doing anything, and actually you're doing more when you reflect than you do 90% of the time. Because reflection will lead to clear action, right action, and greater success. So at 10% of the time, if you do nothing but no meetings, no deliverables, you simply notice what emerges, patterns, connections, insights. What ends up happening is you have a really powerful, much more effective process for yourself. I was with an organization years ago when I was still doing predominantly banking turnarounds. And I walked in and was meeting with the CEO, and I noticed his office, and it was a true CEO's office, but it seemed like there was more to it. And so he told me, he said what he did was when he originally had the office, it was so large and it felt non-personal. So he split it in half, and in the front half of the office, he put a wall in, and the front half is where he did his day-to-day work and things of that nature. But in the back half, if he was back there, he was in reflection. And as a result, he was able to take that organization and shift it from a very, very difficult time. This is back after 9/11, and begin to build a new future, little by little, taking his time until he was able to really understand doing it. And doing it in a sense of strategic. What is the real vision of the organization that we should be doing? How do we serve our customers the absolute best in a way that no one else can? Anybody can deliver services, but who can do it in a way that meets the needs of the client the most? And that takes reflection. The Kaizen culture that came over the country years ago. Now it's called Black Belt and a variety of other subjects. It's one of the most effective ways of actually doing, applying, not doing, because it eliminates unnecessary steps. The problem we have most of the time when we're building various processes in our organizations operationally, we end up doing add-ons. Every time there's a compliance change or a tech change, an engineering change, we just do an add-on of some sort instead of actually every once in a while look at the whole process and saying, how do we get the most value out of this with the least amount of effort? And by doing that, that takes reflection. That takes setting a time aside for people to actually think about what they need to do. So one of the funny things that I came across recently, and I used to use a to-do list, no different than anybody else, but instead of a really long to-do list, it says I will do because it was something I absolutely had to do or felt like I wanted to do. Um, I might do, and I won't do. And won't do is looking at all the things that you waste time, and some of it is just being in a frenzy and not being able to support yourself in a way that is more effective. So to your list should be, and I recommend this on all the executives I work with, 5 minutes a day, sit in silence if you aren't doing it already. And I mean literally sit in silence. And if your mind just goes on, don't worry about it. Your job is just to sit there and let it do whatever it needs to do, because in a way, if you'll excuse me, it's like getting rid of the digital diarrhea in your mind so that you can think clearly. So change happens when we become what we are, not when we try to become what we're not, which is always meaning we're trying to push the rope instead of staying fully present to ourselves and what's going on. A lot of team transformation becomes team building becomes highly effective when the people begin to look at, rather than over engineer a transformative an issue, they actually pay attention to their own internal dynamics and ask themselves, how do we actually create a ground where authentic change can arise, and do it in an authentic way with each other. A lot of the new team building processes are doing that. I often, I was doing this when I was providing training for executive development for DIA years ago. And I would teach people to ground before reacting. In other words, breathe, feel their body awareness, or I often refer to as pause, reflect, and choose. It's a very practical process, doesn't require a whole lot of effort, but what it does is it resets your brain from into mode of running 90 mile an hour down a dead end road, which we're all really good at, to what should I stop doing at this moment, and what should I actually begin to do, and sit with that long enough for yourself to be able to understand it. The paradox of not doing a business is interesting. If we develop reflection, put it into it, less burnout and more engagement happens with our employees. I've had 2 clients that I didn't know this was now a medical condition, where employees were in a constant state of false urgency and had to take 6-month leave for medical burnout. They literally were incapable of functioning. And we do more and more of this, and we act like, especially as coaches and leaders, if we don't pay attention and understand that's our responsibility to prevent that, we're not a good coach, and we're also not a good leader. So not doing is not passivity. It's aligned reaction arising from presence rather than compulsion. So some things you might ask, where in your business is there too much doing without enough awareness? Or what would happen if you paused one major initiative for a quarter? Ask a leader how you can cultivate presence rather than control. And the illusion of control is always interesting to me, because we sit down and think that if we micromanage, or if we just we're a little tighter, or we force a little bit more, we're going to force something. But there's an arc of doing, not doing, that you might want to consider. Most of us are locked into the doing mode, which is action. Then we force false urgency into overdoing, which is busyness. And we teach the employees to at least look busy, instead of giving them the time to breathe to do their job. And they eventually will on their own go into not doing, which they'll pause to collect themselves, even if it means to go sit in the bathroom for a half hour. And eventually, when we do that, we come back out feeling better. But if we do it as a process and organization, you begin to emerge into what's called aligned insight and innovation, where new ideas permeate the organization. So Doing it should be necessary activity to move business forward. Overdoing is compulsive busyness chasing productivity for its own sake or the appearance of it. Not doing is pausing, suspending habitual responses, holding awareness. And emergence is authentic solutions, innovation, and transformation arise naturally. So in today's environment, because right now it's pretty chaotic, we have two ideologies trying to fight for control of the country, which is another way of saying trying to fight for control of the mind or the consciousness of the country. And we have to decide, are we going to perpetuate that by constant reaction, overaction, instead of reflecting and sitting down and saying, is for one, how do we want our organization to be? But also, how do we want our country to be? So that's going to take a while on our part. The art of business, like the art of life, often depends not on how much you do, but how we do deeply we allow what wants to emerge to unfold. And I'm approaching my 74th birthday in about 3 weeks. In the last 20 years, actually more than that, about 40 years, I came up with a philosophy. I only do what's fun, interesting, and challenging. And every day I take the time to reflect and slow down and really examine, what's going on. And if nothing else, it's why I have the phrase digital diarrhea. Just let the mind run. All the craziness that is in there thinking needs to get my attention. I release that energy. It takes about 20 minutes for me. Once that happens, I get up, I'm crystal clear in what I'm doing in my thought process. And that way, whenever I work with a client, I'm very present to them in the moment. Whenever I'm in a leadership position, I'm very clear to the moment of what's happening. One of the things about not doing, the leader and the coach, if they're speaking more than those in the room, not only are you working too hard, you're trying to monopolize the time. And as a result, you're going to lose out on the greatest benefit of all that your employees or your clients have. So I hope this helps you a little bit, something for you to think about, something a little different way of looking at things. And for those interested in some of my further thoughts, the book Coaching, Personal, Transpersonal, Liminal is on Amazon. It's much larger than I thought. It's 328 pages, packed very tightly of case examples, stretch thinking, and theory. Shortly coming out will be coaching at the point of contact. And it actually applies to leaders as well, because in my viewpoint, a core competency of every leader is coaching. It is your responsibility to develop and manage the well-being of your employees because you set the standard. So I'm Herb Stevenson. Appreciate your time. This is Natural Passages, revealing the unmarked doors of life. I hope you have a great day and enjoy today's solstice or equinox. So we're at the balance of time and space before we start moving into the darkness of winter. Take care and be well. Bye-bye.